Hello, and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mahan, and I'm here to chat with you guys today about some environmental news stories and, of course, animals. So, if this is your first time hanging out, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. And thanks for continuing to listen to me gab. So, let's get started with some environmental news. First up, pre warning, this article I'm about to talk about is probably going to not sound great if you're an American. Just saying. It's not going to seem like it's a actual good animal thing. And probably couldn't even imagine doing some of the things that they're going to be talking about in this article, which does go on talking about killing domestic cats. But it is a important conservation thing, and unfortunately it is kind of a big deal around the world, even in America. But for places like New Zealand, which is the country that is talked about a lot in this article, they are taking pretty drastic steps because their animals are so under threat. And to kind of go over what we're talking about, the article that was published by The Guardian was called Bird Killing Machines New Zealand Cools on Cats to Protect Native Wildlife. Now, if you've listened to me for a while, you may think that I really hate cats, and I really don't. I really love domestic cats a lot. However, domestic cats or house cats, they just need to be treated and used in safe and effective ways. I mean, I've said it a lot of times, but domestic cats really are a loaded gun when it comes to conservation and wildlife all around the world. So, I'm not purposely trying to hate on cats. It just happens to keep coming up because unfortunately they are such a big, drastic conservation threat. But why don't we get into the article? Once again, there's going to be some drastic talk on this one, but it is for conservation. So let's talk. So, once a nation of cat lovers, attacks on other animals and recovery in local fauna is reshaping the attitudes towards felines in New Zealand. Out in the bush beyond his house, John McConnell walks with his gun looking for the glint of eyes in the darkness. Now, McConnell, 67, lives outside Auckland and spends most of his time planting native trees on his block of land, trying to restore parts of its original state to draw back the chorus of native birds. At night, he heads out to hunt the predators that threaten them possums, rats, and these days, any uncollared feline unlucky enough to end up in his sights. Now, real quick, that is a list of invasives. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, he's going out and killing a bunch of native wildlife, no, he is going out and trying to hit back unnative animals. So, all right, just they're not supposed to be there. That's why he's doing it. Back to the article. I shoot them, said McConnell. Seriously, if it's a cat and I know who it is, I'll leave it. But if it's a stray cat, it's a goner. Even if it's domestic and it's out at night, I'm getting to the point where I'd shoot those as well because they shouldn't be out. So, like I said, real quick, pretty graphic, but it's one of those things where it is literally getting to that point in New Zealand. Unfortunately, for the rest of us out here in these big mainland areas like North America, Europe, and all that, it might have not felt like it got to that point. But if you do talk to scientists, we're losing billions of birds each year to domestic cats. It's pretty drastic. But on these islands, and even though New Zealand is quite large, it's still technically island, it's even more drastic. So now it's reached kind of catastrophic events on even an island as big as New Zealand. Anyway, back to this. McConnell is not dyed in the wood cat hater. Not so long ago, his family had cats of their own. I said to my wife, when they're gone, we better not replace them, he says, because it's just not cricket anymore. Okay, one last side note. I am going to definitely start using the phrase not cricket anymore. That's just a great phrase. All right, back to the article. The country has had one of the world's highest rates of cat ownership per capita, with close to half of the households owning one. New Zealand is more than 7 years into one of the world's most ambitious pest eradication regimens, aiming to eliminate all the possums, rats, stoats, and ferrets by 2050. As attempts to wipe out those less sympathetic targets roll on. However, other animals are coming under the spotlight, including things like cats. With more than 2 million feral cats and about 1.4 million domestic ones across New Zealand, they are believed to be collectively responsible for huge numbers of attacks on native bird life. I definitively hear more and more people either tell me that they're a reformed cat owner or that the cat they currently own will be their last, said Jesse Morgan, who leads the conservation organization Predator Free NZ. Our attitude towards cats and what responsible pet ownership means is really changing. For some New Zealanders, this means their days as cat owners are over. My wife and I love cats, but we will never have one again, said Tony White, an estate agent. When they farewelled their last cat 15 years ago, he noticed how birds and native lizards began to reclaim his garden. Now he says we have rare birds walking past our living room and nestling in our garden. Kiwi live in the patch of scrub at the back of our house. They would not be there if we still had a cat. We love cats, but New Zealanders may have to choose whether we want cats or birds. And side note, pretty much everything else. According to national pet ownership surveys conducted by Companion Animals New Zealand, the portion of New Zealand households that own cats have been dropped slowly but steadily over the last decade, from almost half to 48% of household owning a cat in 2011 to only 41% by 2020. According to this data, the number of domestic cats in the country has dropped by about 200,000, despite the population of people or potential owners growing by more than 800,000. Part of that shift is likely driven by changing population demographics, including increasing numbers of renters who may not have permission to keep a pet, but a number of New Zealanders who previously owned cats say their view of the animal has shifted. I have owned cats most of my life, many of which simply wandered in and we adopted us, says Simon, a retiree. Now he and his partner have decided not to own a cat again, seeing cat ownership as simply incompatible with our strong interest in promoting bird life in the city. Cats, though adorable and loving, are in essence bird-killing machines, he says. Others like McConnell favor a stronger approach, arguing that domestic cats should be kept inside and feral cats euthanized. This year, the debate over cat control was again propelled in the headlines after a South Island hunting competition promised children prizes for shooting feral cats and raised complaints for animal rights activists. It's not considered neighborly to shoot your neighbor's cat, said Joe Citizen, an educator, but I do think it's time to have a serious national conversation about them. Part of the shift in attitude towards cats may actually be driven by the recovery in New Zealand's native fauna, says Morgan. Cities like Wellington have seen huge recovery in native bird numbers after establishing large urban bird sanctuaries. And as New Zealanders become more involved in national volunteer initiatives to trap other pests, they're confronted on trap cameras with images of cats showing up on the hunt. Now I'm going to butcher this guy's name, sorry. DeGauld Wilson of Christchurch is one of those who carried out volunteer trapping and found that the trap cameras were regularly picking up cats. When our neighbors have a cat, the bird songs are quieted, he says. I like cats and we had 3 as pets, but no more. And that is the article. So as you can see, with this giant invasive initiative that they're trying to do over in New Zealand, unfortunately, all these volunteers who had no problem going out, dealing with the rat problem, dealing with the possum problem, are noticing how devastating the cats are as well there. And because there's so many volunteers from all around this country that are now confronted with it, they really have to come to terms that if they want to really be conservationists or care about their native wildlife, they can't let their cats outside and they really need to take care of the feral cat population. But like I said, I really don't hate cats. It's all about just responsible use if you have one. Next up, we have an article talking about a new hornet species coming to a neighborhood near you. And no, it's not a murder hornet, but it might be worse. Now, this was also published by The Guardian, and it's called The Invasive Yellow-Legged Hornet Found in the U.S. for the First Time. Now, the article goes on to say a yellow-legged hornet has been found in the U.S. for the first time, prompting concerns among experts about the agricultural threat this invasive Asian species poses not least to honeybees and other pollinators. The Georgia Department of Agriculture said a beekeeper in Savannah spotted the insect on his property and reported it to authorities. It was confirmed as a yellow leg hornet. A social wasp species native to tropical and subtropical areas of Southeast Asia, the hornet is established in most of Europe, part of the Middle East, and other areas in Asia where it's not native. But the sighting in Georgia was the first detection of a yellow legged hornet in the open U.S., authorities said. The insect, which an adult reaches approximately 22 millimeters, builds egg-shaped paper nests above the ground, often in trees, that house about 6,000 workers. The hornets can be identified by a yellow strip on the fourth abdominal segment, as well as the bright yellow found on the bottom half of their legs. Now, according to experts, the predatory wasp feeds on arthropods and decaying animals, but prefers honeybees. The European honeybee, a particular target. Authorities urge Georgia residents to report sightings of any yellow-legged hornets, which, if allowed to establish, could potentially threaten honeybee production, native pollinators, and our state's number one industry, agriculture. Residents were used to note the location and date of a sighting, any possible photographs, the location and approximate height of any nests, and to provide descriptions of loss and damage and the direction the hornet went when flying away. Georgians play an important role of helping GDA identify unwanted non-native pests, and I want to thank the beekeeper who reported this sighting to us, as well as other partners at the University of Georgia, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, or APHIS, for working swiftly to confirm its identity, the state's agricultural commissioner, Tyler Harper, said in a statement. Okay, this is a big one, guys. So, with this, it is pretty devastating for a ton of agriculture. For example, no European honeybees, no almonds. European honeybees basically pollinate the almond trees, and if they get devastated by these hornets, basically the almond production in the United States alone would pretty much crash. And scarier still is the fact that since these wasps are a devastator for pollinators in general, if we lose our pollinators here in the United States, whole groups of species of plants could go completely extinct, because if you don't have pollinators spreading pollen to help then plants create seeds by spreading their genetics around, well, then there's not going to be any baby plants anymore. Flowers would stop, the production of seeds would stop, which means whole groups of species of plants here in the US could crash, all because of this one wasp species. And finally, let's end on a positive note. Reported by Mongabi, Mexico announces 13 new protected areas with more to come. Mexico City officials this week announced the creation of 13 new protected areas across 6 states in Mexico, putting the country's list of total federally protected areas at 200. Mexico introduced 6 new national parks and 7 flora and fauna protection areas, all covering about 17,900 hectares, or if you want, 44,276 acres, to be overseen by the National Commission of Protected Natural Areas. The commission said its experts declare 3 additional protected areas by the end of the month. It gives us much pleasure in the administration we can leave behind such a grand legacy for the Mexican people, the Secretary of Environmental and Natural Resources, Maria Gonzalez, at a press conference said. Now, I can't say pretty much most of the names, but they are well spread out across Mexico, and that is just awesome. It's a short article. The rest of it is literally just the names and the sizes of each one, but it's just awesome to see all those national parks and, of course, flora and fauna protection areas, which are kind of more designed not to be public areas like national parks are, and more dedicated to kind of a less human traffic, more about the conservation aspect. A lot of the times they are smaller regions and are just kind of like little tiny restoration areas, if you will. But no matter what, if it's a national park or a tiny restoration area, this is just awesome to hear coming out of Mexico. And that is your environmental news. All right, so I might have screwed up on this one because, oops, didn't really realize until I already posted that last week was episode 50 for me. So since I didn't do it last time, I figured this episode will be our golden 50th episode plus 1. Now, with our golden 51st episode, so to speak, we have to talk about a golden animal, of course. So, for our golden animal, we're going to be talking about the Panamanian Golden Frog. So, first things first, I feel like I should just let you guys know that even though it's called the Panamanian Golden Frog, they are in fact toads. They're part of the toad group. In fact, the group they are found in is called the harlequin toads, and the different species found in this group have such a wide variety of colors and combos they are described to be more colorful than that of even the dart frog group. They even have a really cool looking harlequin toad species out there that is black and purple. But we're going to be talking about our golden boy here, the Panamanian golden frog. Now, their native habitat is two types of habitat: wet forest streams and dry forest streams. They inhabit the slopes of the central rainforest and cloud forests of western central Panama, normally found about 1,100 to 4,300 feet above sea level. Now, for how big they are, females can reach about 1.7 to 2.5 inches or about 4.5 to 6.3 centimeters. Males can reach about 1.4 to 1.9 inches or about 3.5 to 4.8 centimeters. Now, females can weigh about 0.14 to zero point 0.5 ounces or 4 to 15 grams, while males normally weigh about zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.4 ounces or about 3 to 12 grams. So, obviously, females are a bit bigger than the males. Now, they both can live about 7 to 10 years on average, but this is a species that I have worked with personally and have met plenty of other keepers that have worked with them as well. They've been known to live up to 15 years in captivity sometimes. Now, as for looks, they may not be a black and purple toad, but they are not dull either. The Panamanian golden frog is a small, bright colored frog like toad. Its head is longer than it is broad with a point. It has a protuberant nose and a fairly tiny mouth. Its body is slim with long limbs. It is black and yellow with an X shape or a variable black blotches on its back, and its belly is uniformly yellow. Both male and female Panamanian golden frogs have similar colorations and patterns. Now, they have these bright colors because this species is toxic in the wild. The skin of a single Panamanian golden frog contains enough toxin to kill 1,200 mice. Yet, in captivity, they are not. It's the same with a lot of species of dart frogs where, because in captivity they are not eating insects like they would in the wild who were eating toxic plants, it sort of is a whisper down the lane of poison in the wild. And since they're not getting that in captivity, they're not really toxic. Because what is happening is the plants are toxic, the bugs then eat the plants, and then they become toxic because they can handle eating the plant and then they use the toxins. And then the golden frog eats those bugs because they also can handle the toxins of the bugs and then use the toxins from the bugs to then produce its own toxin. Like I said, it's kind of a whisper down the lane, but with toxin. Also, quick side note, just because poison dart frogs and many other amphibians may not be toxic in captivity due to not eating toxic insects, you should still not lick them. Now, back to the golden frogs. The golden frogs eat during the day and use their keen sight to spot insects moving around the edges of streams they call home. When they do spot a tasty snack, they will launch their tongue out like most frogs and toads do to try and snatch up the little bug before it gets away. Now, I have seen these guys plenty of times eating, and when I say lightning fast, I mean if you even blink, you might miss it, all right? I've done it a ton of times where I actually slow motion the video to actually see it, but their tongues are surprisingly long and it moves so quick you may not even notice it. Now, they're not as long as, say, like a chameleon, but their reach is a lot farther than you may think. And it shoots out so quick that that bug doesn't even realize that the toad is there most of the time. Now, as for things that might try to eat them in a blink of an eye, there really isn't much. They have those bright colors as a warning, and things like birds of prey, snakes, and other reptiles pretty much stay clear away, knowing if they are brave enough to show up in that location and try and eat them, it's probably not going to go well. However, there may be some that try and go after them that can handle their toxins a little bit better, but for the most part, when you're an animal that is being very vibrant and not trying to hide, yeah, you might as well stick to something that's trying to hide from you. It's probably a lot safer to eat. However, like I said, a couple species probably still go after them. Now, as for their breeding, Panamanian golden frogs mate between November and January. During that time, it is kind of the late rainy, early dry season. Throughout much of the year, females move into the forest while males will normally stay around or near the streams. But when it's time, male Panamanian golden frogs make sort of a whistling sound and have at least two different kinds of calls, loud enough to carry into the forest from their home near the water's edge, especially since, they are kind of going against current water. It's going to be very loud where they're singing from. Now, the singing, however, is still a very interesting behavior considering that the frogs themselves don't really have eardrums, and the rivers, as I said, are fairly loud. So the calls probably are getting picked up somehow, even with the lack of hearing and noisy habitat. But they have to have another way to communicate, don't they? Because without those eardrums, it's going to be very hard to communicate once they show up. Now, they do. They wave. They will wave to attract mates and wave to fight or claim territory. Throughout much of the years, females, like I said, are in the forest. But when they come near the streams, males wait for the females to return. And then they try to attract mates by hand waving. Females hand wave as well. Now, male golden frogs also will wave to scare off other males that encroach on their territory. And that's literally all they will do. Two will literally approach each other and wave and wave and wave until one backs off without even having to touch or technically fight each other, though I guess you could call a wave battle a fight. They will also do this to females not yet ready to mate. A female will wave aggressively at any male that approaches her as if testing his resolve. If he appears discouraged by her waving, she will not mate with him. If he is still persistent despite her waving, she will mate with him. So it's almost like a Panamanian golden frog has this whole sign language to them, which to us just looks like a bunch of different waving, but as we can see, it has a whole different round of communication there. Also, speaking as someone who had worked with them, I really can't see any of the males ever backing off because they are, well, very eager beavers when it comes to breeding, let's just say. There's a what we call amplexing, where that's the actual act of a male being on top of a female and kind of locking into place. Because a lot of times other males will try and push the male that's on the female off. So they really lock themselves in there when they do get ready to breed. And is one of the benefits of why the males are smaller than the females. They literally lock into the female, and then the female will literally take them to a place to breed a lot of the time. But males get so into it, they will literally lock themselves onto females, other males, other types of frogs, and literally won't let go for hours or days. And they will literally try to starve themselves if they are just that into, well, amplexing. So sometimes you need to have them have a timeout, let them chill down, get them away from pretty much anything that moves. And after maybe a day or so, they're pretty much right as rain, and you can place them back so they can get some food and hang out with their friends again. But yeah, you're still going to have to keep an eye out for them because they are very, very into amplexing, let's just say. Now, if it is breeding season, however, once a male does attract a female mate, he attaches himself tightly to her back and will piggyback for several days and will even stay on her for weeks until she finds a suitable place to lay her eggs. She looks for a shallow pool of stream water, preferably out of direct sunlight with rocks or pebbles in it. She lays a single long strand of eggs that attaches to rocks or pebbles, which can number up to 600 eggs. Definitely going for the let's have as many babies as possible and maybe one will survive approach versus other animals that may have one baby and spend some time trying to keep that one going. Now, as soon as she lays her eggs, the male will fertilize them. The couple then disbands and, like most amphibians, will take no part in raising their young. So they are a external fertilization, obviously, and that also explains why they lay so many eggs. They have no parent rearing obligation whatsoever. So it's really just a dump and run kind of situation. Now, the tadpoles don't have to wait too long because about 9 days later, after she laid her eggs, the tadpoles will already hatch out. They will spend about 6 to 7 months in the stream where they hatch, eating algae off rocks and growing into little froglets, or, well, in this place, toadlets. The froglets are brown and tiny when they first hop out of the water and onto a nearby leaf. They continue to eat and grow once on land, gradually changing color and pattern as they build up toxins in their skin to change from a more camouflage pattern to that more significant pattern that shows the rest of the forest they are toxic. After all, they've just been eating algae as tadpoles, so they really don't have any of the toxins that they would get from the insects on land yet. And once they do get that, then they start getting into those more colorful patterns to indicate to everyone that they should not be eaten. With a short amount of time, they could be ready to breed the following season or two later. Now, for as many babies as one single golden frog can produce, they must be doing good in the wild, right? Well, according to the IUCN Red List, they are listed as critically endangered, population decreasing, with a possible extinction in the wild, with at most maybe 40 individuals, but very well possibly zero individuals left in the wild. So, very not good. And this is probably one of the most threatened animals we're going to be talking about yet. So, of course, logging and climate change and all that fun is a big blame, but the very big, very scary reason for the depletion of the Panamanian golden frog is actually due to chytrid fungus. Now, amphibian chytrid fungus is an infectious fungal disease that can be fatal to amphibians. As the disease spread globally beginning in the 1970s, many populations declined greatly and species became extinct rapidly. The global declines and extinction of amphibians were first noticed and misunderstood at the time in the 1970s and 1980s. Chytrid was not even discovered until 1999, and it was not until the early 2000s that conservationists really had a grasp on the magnitude of the problem. This was the first time in history, by the way, that biodiversity conservation experts realized that a disease could be a primary threat to biodiversity that could lead to direct extinction. The chytrid fungus, by the way, is microscopic and grows in the skin layers of an infected amphibian. The fungi release spores that swim throughout the water until they settle on the skin of a new host. Infected animals may show no symptoms, or they may become sick with a symptoms such as unhealthy skin and sluggish, or they might die. Deaths are caused by heart failure that result from inability of the diseased amphibians to regulate the water moving through its permeable skin. With amphibians, you really need to be able to have a flow of water through their skin. That's why so many of them need to be, well, near water. Now, various factors influence how severe will be the effects of these chytrid fungus on the individual. These factors involve the local environmental conditions, the level of infection, aka how many spores have infected the individual, or how many infected individuals are in a given area, as well as the genetic strain of chytrid involved. So, like any disease, and unlike many other conservation efforts we deal with, you can't just buy up land and stop logging. This is spread by animal movement in water and so much more. Chytrid fungus is a disease that was found elsewhere in the world, Asia and Africa pretty much, and was spread due to pet trade and things like the African clawed frog. So all of that caused chytrid to quite rapidly spread across the world, and no part of the world kind of had a more devastating the effect from chytrid fungus than Central and South America, and of course North America, where in Central America, that's where the Panamanian golden frog is from. Now, many species decline so quickly that within a year, chytrid all seem to have wiped them out, in fact. So, what can we do against such a major threat? Well, it's already being done, luckily, for the Panamanian golden frog. Being a major symbol of Panama when they came into threat, many took action right away. A combination of U.S. zoos and local researchers literally went out, took as many different frogs and toads from the wild as they could, with the golden frog being the main one that they were after, to get them out of this lethal environment before there were none left. Now, they did try to treat them with antifungal properties to make sure that they didn't bring in a disease into captivity and cause all their frogs that they were trying to save to catch it. But because the fungus still remains out in the wild, even after the treatments, if an animal was infected, it is still not a good idea to then place them back into the wild when literally it's on fire, so to speak. In fact, all of this was happening so quickly, they didn't even have a facility ready when they first got started. In fact, a local hotel was basically acting as the Conservation Amphibian Center until the actual Amphibian Conservation Center was built, because who knows how many species would have been lost if they had waited. Now, locally and internationally, through organizations like AZA or the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is the big accreditation group that most large facilities in the US are part of, but still not many facilities because there's only around 200 in total, are part of breeding programs for a number of different things, one of which, of course, is for the golden frog breeding, and they've had quite great success. And they're not just trying to breed them, but they're also trying to find long term solutions to deal with chytrid, because simply putting the golden frogs back in is like throwing them into a fire that hasn't actually burnt out, or you haven't really dealt with it yet. Because, yeah, you could have a bunch of healthy frogs that don't have chytrids, but then if you throw them in the environment with chytrid, they're just going to die anyway. Now, they of course can defungal areas, but it's never 100% because obviously water and animals that do have chytrid could get back in there. And of course, by killing off things with antifungal, you're also killing off good fungus as well, because there is such thing as good fungus. So even though there might look like a pristine, beautiful habitat for these frogs to go back to, there's a hidden danger that still lurks. As for the things you can do at home, you can give to these organizations or groups trying to help the golden frog, or go to zoos or facilities that are open that work with them as well. Because going also financially helps them. Plus, bonus, you can get to see these animals you're trying to save, as well as many others. And finally, the big one is to make sure you're not spreading the disease yourself. If you have pet frogs, be cautious where you're pouring old water, especially African clawed frog water. Are you dumping it into a safe area that water gets cleaned and sterilized and prevents disease getting back into the wild, like a proper working sewer line system? Or are you just simply pouring the water into your backyard where animals could pick up possible spores and infect local water spots? Because simply looking at your own pet frog, you can't use it as an example of, well, my frog isn't sick, so it must not have a disease. Many different amphibians react differently to the chytrid fungus, as well as many species over in Asia that literally grew and evolved with chytrid fungus. It is not as devastating for them. This fungus broke out of its native region, and that is what is making it so devastating. So don't use your frog not being sick as the reason why you dump your water outside. The other thing is, make sure you're not trucking through water and mud in one area and then go to another without cleaning off your gear or shoes, because you could be spreading the disease from one area to another that didn't already have it. All these things will help not spread the diseases like chytrid, and will slow the progression of it sweeping through all the waterways, giving scientists a chance to help save these animals, just like our amazing Panamanian golden frog. And that's the show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Panamanian golden frog. As always, make sure to check me out on my social media pages: Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Or if you want, you can always email me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. Links will be provided below in the episode footer. Also, time is still not up on Blue Loop's 50 Most Influencer Award for Zoo and Aquarium peeps. If you have anyone you want to nominate, make sure to also check out the link down below in the footer while it's still open. And that is it. That concludes our Golden 50th episode plus one. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you all next time.